welcome to the Kickback. We have just seen Manchester United put to the sword at St James's Park. Newcastle running out 4-1 winners in the end. My name is Richie McCormack. I was joined on commentary for it by Keith Treacy. A double from Harvey Barnes, Bruno Guimaraes in the second half as well for the Toon. This all after Sandro Tonali had given Newcastle the lead and Alejandro Garnacho cancelled that out 8 minutes before half time. It was comfortable in the end for Newcastle, really.
Way too comfortable, yeah, really. That'll be one thing that I think Ruben Amorim will be will be speaking about in the dressing room. I know after 45 minutes it's 1-1, but Newcastle would have been in their dressing room thinking, let's keep doing what we're doing and we will get our rewards. Boyan Deer, I know it's his Premier League debut, but just looked a little bit shaky from set pieces, and I think it's nonsensical when you've got somebody who's going to be a little bit nervous. Sometimes you try and, you shelter him a little bit, you try and help him that bit. But the centre halves of Manchester United, the way they kept trying to play out in the back, the way they kept giving the ball to Boyan Deer, the Newcastle players were closing them down with so much energy. Sometimes you've got to try and back that press off. And look, Manchester United went to St James's Park. They had the lion's share of possession, but looked very, very passive. Never really looked like opening Newcastle. So I think Newcastle were happy to let United have the ball and go hunting them. And they knew if our press is right, we will get big opportunities against United. And it was mistake after mistake.
Without the perspective of this game, what did you make of the decision to remove Onana from the firing line from Amorim after that Lyon game and with the second leg, I guess, to come on Thursday?
Well, I understand it. I totally understand why Amorim has done it. As I said, I think it'd be a much bigger call if he was to do it against Lyon on Thursday night. To do it against Newcastle when I'm sure all the Manchester United players are thinking, look, it is what it is in the Premier League now. It's embarrassing. It's going to be a really, really low finish for them. But if they can go and get some sort of European success, it might just save face with everybody. So I think they've put all their eggs in the basket. I think Onana will start on Thursday, given how, I wouldn't say poorly, but given the mistakes and how shaky Boyan Deer looked, I would imagine Onana will come back. But I'm sure he would have been given the spiel that I'm taking you out of the firing line, I'm your best mate. But for me, Newcastle away is a massive, massive game. And if you're not in the starting 11, you haven't even travelled with the squad, it's got to be a slap on the wrist. And I'm sure Onana will take it that way.
It's a massive fixture on paper for sure. But the reality of it was that if Manchester United won this game, they were staying 13th, regardless of what happens. I mean, that's just the way the cookie has crumbled for them this season. So with Lyon in mind on Thursday, you can hardly blame Amorim for cutting his cloth to his measure, I guess. I guess the problem is, whatever team he did put out today, he didn't want them to get beat comfortably. And that's ultimately what happened.
Yeah, and now the worry for Amorim and the Manchester United players and fans will there be a little bit of a hangover? Because, look, I know it is what it is in the Premier League. They couldn't go any further up. But it was way too easy. Way, way, way too easy. It wasn't even really a contest. I mean, there was long periods of the first half that Newcastle were much, much better. In the second half, they just went out and compounded the fact that they were better. And look, on the wings, Newcastle were just having their way with them. Through the middle, Manchester United never really looked capable of cutting Newcastle open. So why they persisted with going through the middle, playing these tight little triangles that, it's got to be brilliant football. And 2 minutes into it, Rich, we're looking at the game thinking there's a lot of players slipping over here when it gets intense. So if it's a slippy pitch or it's a little bit wet on top, don't risk it. Play sensible football, and United's football at times is very, very nonsensible.
I know they've chopped and changed the midfield a lot this year, but the relationship between defence and midfield seems almost non-existent in that when they do try and play those short balls out from defence, it's not as if there's a focal point coming from midfield like a Tonali does for Newcastle to try and win it, to try and get the cheap out for the defender and turn and build from there. Like, I'm trying to think of an instance where a United defender played it forward into midfield and then they broke an attack from there. It never really happened. It was coming from the wings. There was the odd run from Xerxes before he went off with a hamstring. Their outlets aren't there, certainly weren't there this afternoon.
Well, that's the problem. Like I say to Manchester United fans, you don't have an awful lot of playmakers, and they always throw at me Bruno Fernandes. And I think, yeah, but Bruno Fernandes is one player. Yeah. So if he's further up the pitch and he's being marked, who's going to be the one to make something happen to unlock Bruno Fernandes? And when you've got Yoro, Lindelof and Mazraoui, they're the three that Boyan Deer is giving the ball to, saying, right lads, you go and do it. I never see them playing a pass and, breaking lines and you go, what a wonderful ball into midfield. They've got the attack underway. It's sort of scrappy, bobbly balls and it's fighting. And you can never be a possession-based team if the lads who are starting off the moves are giving in 50-50 balls. And when they bypassed the midfield to try and go past the Newcastle press, You know, Joshua Xerxes in the first half in particular lost every single battle up against Dan Bourne, and if it was Fabian Schär, pretty much the same. When Hoyland come on, he wriggled free once or twice, but you know, by and large, Fabian Schär, Dan Bourne would have had a fairly easy game. And you know, Xerxes needs to be a little bit more physical, put up that little bit more of a fight. And Garnacho scored a wonderful goal. He's shown us all he can finish, and he's a good player. But if you're not going to walk to the right and you're not going to compete in 50-50 battles, then you're no use away from home.
His work ethic before that goal stank.
Absolutely,
I don't think there's any getting around that, and that's probably partially why the reason he was taken off.
And look, I'm always quick to say that I love Garnacho, and I do love him, because when he runs at people, he's very, very exciting. He gets you on the edge of your seat, but that's the hard side of the game. The easy side of the game is just fighting and being competitive, being a body, being defensively minded. And look, I don't think he's good enough to only have one side of the game down. If he's only decent when he has the ball, then he's not good enough to be in this Manchester United team. You have to be a modern day winger. You have to go backwards as well as forwards. And Garnacho, when he goes backwards, looks very, very uninterested.
Newcastle were gifted a few of their goals. Let's be honest about it. But what they did very well. And in the centre of the park, once again, he opened the scoring today. Sandro Tonali has turned into one of the Premier League's best midfielders at the moment, hasn't he?
Yeah, I absolutely love him. And look, when I look at Tonali, he seems to have a bit of everything. He's got that class, he's got brilliant technical ability, can kill a ball with his first touch, can be physical with players, can use his body really well. And he has that nasty side that, you know, he will leave a little bit on you. So he has a little bit of everything. The running power, we seen him, I think it was, you know, late in the 80 odd minute, where he's running away from the likes of Mason Mount. And yeah, I think he's been a breath of fresh air since he's come into Newcastle. And when you look at Tonali, Joe Linton is probably the most Brazilian player I've ever seen. But I absolutely love him, and I would pick him every week to be in my midfield. And the running power, the class of Tonali and Bruno Guimaraes, balance with the physicality of them, they have a little bit of everything. And as you said in the commentary, Rich, nobody wants to play against that Newcastle midfield, and with the wingers they have also, it's a frightening prospect.
With Anthony Gordon getting back fit and getting back from suspension, he was on the bench today, came on in the second half there. What a day for Harvey Barnes to score two and say, you're not moving me, son.
Yeah, exactly. And look, that's the headaches that Eddie Howe, Jason Tinder will all want. The wingers, even Jacob Murphy on the other side, he's probably still a little bit technically raw, but just keeps churning out assists and goals. And yeah, look, I really, really liked him. And when you've got Anthony Gordon coming off the bench, you're thinking, we're in a really good place here, and nobody wants to be one-on-one with those Newcastle wingers. And Isak's probably a little bit quiet. I know he had a brilliant assist for Tonali's goal, but other than that, a little bit quiet. But they've got so many outlets and so many weapons to hurt you with Newcastle that, as I said, it can be frightening.
They're obviously heading towards Champions League football. They'll be fairly confident now, finishing in the top 5. Where would they need to strengthen between now and next season if they are going to actually offer twin threats? Because we saw them before, they weren't necessarily able to manage both the league and the Champions League. They need to find a way to do that now. So there's a big summer ahead for Eddie Howe. Big
summer ahead, yeah. But look, if you're one of the better players in and around Europe, Newcastle will be somebody who's right on your radar. They have the finances, they have the backing of the crowd. They get big crowds every single week. So I think it's a very attractive proposition. The middle of the pitch, I think they're okay. The right down the spine of the pitch is great. But you look at Alexander Isak, obviously a whole mountain of goals. Yeah. But there's going to be games, if they get into the Champions League, which I do think they will do, next season, that they will have to pick and choose when Isak can play. So they will need, I don't think Callum Wilson is quite up to that type of standard. He's okay last 5-10 minutes here or there when the game is already done. But in terms of Champions League football, Premier League football next season, I think they could do another striker just to help Isak out. Is beating Lyon on Thursday a realistic proposition for Manchester United? It's definitely realistic. Look, I don't think Lyon are any great shapes. I think they're a solid enough team. They've got some players that can hurt you. But if you take out the 2 Onana mistakes, I think United comfortably win that game. So I think United will be thinking, if we can eradicate mistakes on Thursday night, being at home, you would fancy them. But Lyon also, we thinking, if we can get the crowd against Manchester United, start turning that screw, it can become toxic in Old Trafford very, very quickly. So I think it's a flip of a coin. And look, United, I think, are better on paper, but given how flaky they are, given some of the performances I've seen there today, I don't think Lyon will be fearing them too much. Yeah. Keith, thanks very much. That's the Kickback.